Good evening. I'm Tina Houston. I'm Deputy Director here at the library. We are delighted to co-host this event tonight, and I want to welcome all of you personally, everybody from the school and the Strauss Center, and everybody from the university community. And before Dean Steinberg introduces our distinguished guest, please turn off your cell phones. Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody. It's great to see such a terrific turnout here on behalf of the LBJ School and the Strauss Center. We're so pleased to see you all here. It really reflects, I think, the tremendous level of interest across the campus and in this community and getting connected with the events in the world today. And this is a very special occasion for all of us because we're here with the opportunity to welcome back to Austin and the University of Texas our own very distinguished graduate of UT, Dr. Salam Fayyad, the Prime Minister of the Palestinians. He has a really remarkable career, and it really is a career of public service, which many of us here at the LBJ School can appreciate especially. He was born in the West Bank in 1952, went and did his undergraduate degree in Beirut, and graduated in 1975 at a very interesting and challenging time in the history of that country. After discovering that a classmate of his had made his way to Austin, decided to pursue his graduate studies here in Austin, first doing an MBA at St. Edward's, followed by a PhD in economics at UT, where he graduated in 1986. And I discovered in talking to him today that we actually owe a debt of gratitude to the pharmacy school, because it was his classmate, his undergraduate classmate, who was actually going to pharmacy school here, who brought him to Austin. So the world has strange ways of bringing people together, but we're very grateful for that. Upon graduating from UT, he both had an academic and an economic policy career, teaching both here and at Yarmouth University, and as a visiting scholar at the Federal Reserve at St. Louis, but then spent a number of years working for the IMF and the World Bank, ending up as the regional manager of the Arab Bank in Palestine in 2002. And then I think in a transformation which perhaps was unanticipated but very welcome in terms of its impact, he became finance minister for the Palestinian Authority in 2003. Where he served from 2003 to 2005, and then returned in 2007 to become finance minister again, and then under quite extraordinary circumstances, a few months later, became prime minister. He was talking to us a little bit before we joined you this evening about those circumstances, and it really is a tremendous epigon of public service when he was asked to take on this job, which is an enormously daunting and challenging one under any set of circumstances. He indicated that he said, "What could I do? I had to say yes." And the idea that when your country calls that you can think of nothing else other than to say yes, I think is something that we really all can appreciate and admire. He's going to talk to us obviously about his experience there, but I wanted to just read to you a brief excerpt from an interview that James Bennett, who used to be the Jerusalem bureau chief of the New York Times, now the editor of Atlantic Monthly, did spend a day or two with now Prime Minister Fayyad in 2003, right after he became finance minister for the first time. And he described Salam Fayyad as, quote, "the kind of Palestinian you rarely hear about, an economist trained in Texas, who has never fired a gun, sent men into battle, or spent time in prison and exile." But then he went on to quote Dr. Fayyad in saying, his motto was, "If you have authority, use it. If you don't, create it." So ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you to join me in welcoming Dr. Salam Fayyad, Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim, for warm words of introduction. Indeed, very generous words of introduction. I'm overwhelmed by those comments, but I'm overwhelmed for just being here, to be honest with you. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot tell you what a pleasure it is for me to be back in Austin and at the University of Texas. I remember vividly when I came here in 1979 as a young graduate student. I had recently gotten my BA from the American University of Beirut, and it was my first time in the United States. It's hard to imagine a more welcoming destination for young Palestinians than Austin and the University of Texas, at which I enrolled after I got an MBA from the other university in Austin, and that's St. Edward's. My experiences here deeply affected me. My doctorate in economics prepared me for work at the International Monetary Fund and set the stage for me to become a banker for a brief while, a finance minister, a parliamentarian, and now Prime Minister of the Palestinian National Authority. But Austin also made me a lifelong fan of Longhorn football. Who can forget the 2006 Rose Bowl game when Texas played Southern Cal and won the national championship under Vince Young? I watched that game in Ramallah, Palestine, and I can assure you, I was pulling for the Longhorns just as strongly as anyone in Austin, Pasadena, or any city around the world for that matter. My son Khalid is in the audience today. His mom, who is also in the audience, and I are proud to say that he's a freshman at UT. We are insisting that he be a serious student. But I also expect him to become an avid Longhorn fan, just like his dad. Before coming to Austin, I was thinking about the Latin phrase that you see on the ET sheet. I remember seeing it all over campus when I was a graduate student. Disciplina Praesidium Civitatis. I hope you were listening. I'm not going to repeat that. But that phrase, loosely translated, means that an educated mind is the guardian of democracy. This has a special meaning for me and other Palestinians more generally. My people are literally in the struggle of our lives to establish a democracy of our own. I can say from first-hand experience that democracy is a hard thing to build when almost every aspect of your life is controlled potentially or actually by others. Military occupation is anything but conducive to the establishment of a democracy. Nevertheless, despite the odds, I believe we are making significant progress in this direction. Our record in holding free and fair elections is good. The presidential elections we held in January 2005 that brought Mahmoud Abbas to office were a model of openness and fairness. The same can be said, of course, of the 2006 parliamentary elections, in which Hamas won a majority of the seats in the Palestinian Legislative Council. You and many Palestinians may not have been happy with the outcome of those elections. But no one can deny that they were free and fair and that Hamas had won. Of course, we acknowledge that elections in and of themselves do not make a democracy. Much more is needed, including transparent and accountable government institutions, security for our citizens, and a functioning economy that provides jobs, tax revenues for services, and a future for our children. While we have had a lot of false starts in the past decade or so, I do feel that we are making genuine progress now. Even before the Palestinian National Authority was established in 1994, we had a vibrant and active civil society. Perhaps the most highly developed civil society in the Arab world. The NGO community, along with our universities and schools, was in many ways a substitute for our lack of government and provided us a good basis for developing institutions of governance. I'm proud of what I was able to accomplish as Minister of Finance of the Palestinian Authority over the period 2002-2005. I consolidated all the revenues of the Palestinian Authority, all those streams, into a central and transparent financial account. We managed over that period to introduce a number of significant reforms that elevated the performance of that system and transformed it from something that looked like anything goes type of environment to a system that measured up to high international standards. And after a period of institutional degradation, due in part to the financial siege that was imposed on the Palestinian Authority over the period March 2006 through June 2007, we have managed in a short time since my government took office to fully repair the system and upgrade it to the point where, in my professional judgment, it now measures up to the highest international standards in terms of the system's integrity, transparency, and accountability. Indeed, we are now planning a major event for early next month, at which the website of the Ministry of Finance of Palestinian Authority will be relaunched with a commitment to publish with only a 10-day lag detailed monthly reports on our financial operations so that our citizens can see for themselves where our revenues came from and how they're spent. This is an achievement without equal in the region and is one that is in line with best international practice. We are working hard with the help of the United States as well as our European and Arab friends to reform and professionalize our security services. I can tell you with absolute certainty that we are making concrete progress on the security front. We have deployed police and other security elements and taken control of the situation in cities like Nablus, the third largest city in the West Bank. We have also sent retrained police to Bethlehem and Tulkarm, the city where I come from. Wherever we have deployed police, the security situation has taken a significant turn for the better. We are doing this not as a favor to Israel, and not because the Americans or Europeans have asked us to do it. We are taking charge of security because that's what our people want. They want a predictable and secure place to live. They want to be able to work and send their kids to school without worrying about crime and violence. We are, of course, mindful of the regional implications of our security effort, and I'm confident that our neighbors, including Israel, would draw comfort from the certain knowledge that we view security to be at least as much a Palestinian need as an Israeli need. The question on my mind is whether we will be allowed to succeed. For example, in Nablus, the Israeli military authorities told our police that they had to remain in their barracks between midnight and 6 a.m. so that Israeli forces could conduct nighttime raids and arrests. Israeli authorities have also said our security forces cannot wear body armor given to us by the British because the armor could stop Israeli bullets. And until recently, they have refused, with a few exceptions, to allow our police to operate in villages where Israel has overall security responsibility. In the latter case, the Israelis do little to control crime or criminal gangs in these villages. We can do the job if only given a chance. We've been discussing this with Israelis, and things have started to change to the better. As I have mentioned, operating in rural areas was not possible before. Now, with some coordination, we are being allowed to operate in rural areas with good results. Again, we were able to deal with criminal activity in those areas in ways that simply did not happen before, because this kind of activity was not taken care of, and there was a lot of crime around. And as I say, when given a chance, we can deliver, and we have proved it. Another challenge we face relates to our economy. Currently, 49% of Palestinian households in the West Bank and 79% in the Gaza Strip live in poverty. In addition, 34% of Palestinians face food insecurity, defined as households with income and consumption of $0.60 a day. Our situation would be even more dire were it not for the generosity of the international donor community. A donor conference held in Paris last December resulted in pledges of more than $7 billion in assistance over the next 3 years. The United States increased its financial support to the PNA, Palestinian National Authority, considerably compared to previous years, pledging some $555 million for 2008 alone. We appreciate very much this assistance and largesse, but we want to develop our economy, not to live on the dole. We know that no amount of donor assistance will sustain our economy, especially if the money merely goes to meet salaries and recurrent expenditure needs. This is why we look to channel more and more donor funds to development projects. Already we have initiated some 250 small community development projects like the rehabilitation of schools, clinics and local roads. However, the only way to ensure the sustainable recovery of our economy is through the private sector. For this reason, we are making great efforts to encourage Palestinians and international businesses to invest in the future of Palestine. In late spring, for example, we will be hosting an international conference in Bethlehem to encourage private sector investment from all over the world, including from Israel. We hope to follow up this conference with similar events in other cities around the world. But like so many of the other problems we face, we don't know if we will be allowed to rebuild our economy and provide jobs for our people. The Quartet, the donor community, and the international financial institutions all agree on what is needed for economic recovery, and that is to remove the restrictions on the movement of people and goods. Israel has pledged to do this, but little to no action has been taken so far. In fact, the number of checkpoints and roadblocks erected by Israel in the West Bank increased from 528 to 561 in 2007. Here, we Palestinians face a chicken and egg argument. Israel argues that these obstacles to movement are necessary to ensure its security. And we are indeed very sensitive to the security needs of the State of Israel. Yet, as the United Nations Quartet and international community have recognized, security is likely to elude Israelis and Palestinians alike unless the socio-economic situation of Palestinians radically improves. A poor and hungry people do not provide fertile ground for peaceful and democratic state. That's a chicken and egg argument. Problem with restrictions on mobility. They are there, they are erected, they severely restrict movement and constrain economic activity and development. Problem is, of course, related to the security situation. The Israelis represent constantly that these checkpoints are there precisely to provide security which otherwise would be breached if those checkpoints were removed. That's the circularity of the argument. Because of the checkpoints, you have poverty and you have an impoverished people living in a state of complete despair. How do you break that? I think we really need to work on this. We need to persevere. We need to continue to do the very best we can, including especially on security. But as we do, we should expect these restrictions to begin to be eased in the hope that they ultimately will be removed. Because unless they are, it is hard for me to see how our economy can develop and how we can move onto a path of sustainable development to create jobs necessary to absorb some at least 50,000 new entrants, new young men and women who enter the labor force every year. Not to mention, of course, that we already have a very high unemployment problem. So this is the circularity of the situation in which we are and which we have to contend with. Nevertheless, we have to continue to work. We have to be patient. We have to persevere, because just simply there is no other way. Either we sit back and continue to argue about this forever, or we take a shot at it and begin to do what we can. So far, I have to say to you, though, progress has been limited. Nevertheless, we remain determined to stay the course in the hope that we'll be able, working together, to change all of this to a better situation. All of these things, good governance, security, a healthy economy, are insufficient, albeit necessary ingredients for democracy. In fact, we will never be able to attain the height of good governance, security, or a healthy economy without one key element, and that is, quite simply, the freedom to live our lives and govern ourselves as a people without the interference of outside forces. None of the efforts that we have made to improve the governance, security, or economy of Palestinians will be sustainable if we are not free of the occupation we have lived under for 40 years. This means a sovereign and independent state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital, living side by side in peace and security with the state of Israel. Of course, we face internal challenges as well as external ones to the implementation of this vision. It was Abraham Lincoln who said in 1858 that a house divided against itself cannot stand. For our part, we need to continue cultivating a culture of good governance, rule of law, human rights, and non-violent conflict resolution throughout all segments of our society. For these are the very building blocks for the kind of state that we have longed for and one that we can be proud of. However, I do believe that the political fragmentation we currently face is at least in part a result of the failure to deliver freedom and peace to our people, and not the other way around. If we offer Palestinian people a vision of peace based on freedom, justice, and dignity for us and our neighbors, I'm confident that my people will unite behind this vision. What is happening to the 1.5 million Palestinians living in Gaza epitomizes this point. In September 2005, Israel, much to the delight of Palestinians, ended its colonization of the Gaza Strip. Regrettably, however, Israel retained its control over Gaza's airspace, sea space, and borders, among other things, turning Gaza into a prison of sorts. Since then, Israel has gradually increased its closure over Gaza. The situation there has become intolerable. The infrastructure of Gaza is collapsing. Unemployment is higher than almost anywhere in the world. Basic necessities, including medicines and food, are increasingly scarce. Around 80% of the Palestinians in Gaza depend on some form of humanitarian assistance to meet their daily nutritional requirements. The United Nations agency that provides for many of the Palestinian refugees in Gaza, which comprise some 80% of the population, was 2 weeks ago on the verge of suspending its food distribution program for a mundane reason: the lack of plastic bags. Entry of plastic bags into Gaza was blocked. These bags, as I said, are used by UNRWA, the United Nations agency in charge of providing the aid to Palestinians. Fortunately, Israel relented and let the bags into Gaza, but a lot of other commodities are still prevented from getting into Gaza. Let me be very clear that we are totally against the firing of rockets against Israeli towns from Gaza. And just as I reject the firing of rockets and all forms of violence from Gaza, so too do I reject the disproportionality of Israel's military actions and the collective punishment it has imposed on our people in Gaza. The frustration felt by Gazans was clearly demonstrated in recent weeks by the scene of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians streaming into Egyptian towns in Sinai to buy food, medicine, fuel, and other necessities of life. However, this was not the first, and regrettably probably not the last sign of Palestinians' frustration. In my view, the outcome of the 2006 parliamentary elections was in large part a manifestation of the frustration of that Palestinians harbor toward the failure of the Oslo peace process to deliver them peace and freedom. Yet despite all of these challenges and frustration, I remain cautiously optimistic about my people's future. My government remains committed to doing everything in its power to deliver strong, transparent institutions, security, and a healthy economy to our people, on the path to, in President Bush's words, end the occupation that began in 1967, and to establish an independent state that, by virtue of having a demonstrative commitment to the rule of law, human rights, equality, tolerance, and cultural sensitivity, will make a qualitative contribution to the region. However, not all the power resides with us. Israel, with the support and encouragement of the international community, need to partner with us, and we need to partner with it in order to free the Palestinian people from 40 years of occupation and allow us to establish our own state where we can live in peace, security, and dignity alongside our neighbors, the State of Israel. Thank you again for the invitation to speak here. When I come to Austin and to the University of Texas, I always feel that I'm at home. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Prime Minister, for that characteristically candid and clear-sighted assessment of the situation. And we're going to have plenty of opportunity to go to the audience. We're fortunate to have so many distinguished guests here, Chancellor Yudof and his wife, President Powers, Dean Deal and his wife, Jim Lindsay and others. And so I don't want to hog all the time, but I can't resist a couple of questions to get started, if I might. And I'd like to begin a little bit, just probing a bit more on the problem of Gaza. You've talked about chicken and egg problems, and if there ever a big chicken and a big egg, it's there. You've spoken very eloquently about the need to disarm the militias and to take the guns out of this equation. But I guess my question to you is, how do you break the cycle in Gaza where you have the Hamas militants who have an incentive to provoke, to, in effect, try to encourage the closures, to deepen the disenfranchisement and the disenchantment of the people there for their own political agenda? And how would you kind of get traction on the problem of making sure that there is movement of people and goods into Gaza in a way that allows you and the Palestinian National Authority to get a control which up till now you haven't been able to exercise?
Thank you, Jim. Well, first of all, let me again say that there are 1.5 million Palestinians who currently live in Gaza. They are not Hamas or Hamas militias. They have little or nothing to do with what's going on there. The situation there in Gaza is one where our people living there do not have a whole lot to lose, quite frankly. By virtue of the passages to Gaza being completely closed, very little gets in and virtually nothing gets out, not to mention people, except for what you saw by way of highly disorderly, to say the least, movement across the border into Egypt, and with all the trouble that ensued because of that. That situation is clearly not sustainable. My government had put forward some 4 months ago an initiative to have the passages reopened to allow movement in and out, with us and the Palestinian Authority assuming responsibility for managing the Palestinian side of the crossings if Israel were to accept to reopen them. Underlying this was my firm belief that sanctions did nothing in Gaza but bring about more misery to our people living there. In fact, if one were to appeal to the international experience with sanctions around the world, one would be hard-pressed to find one example where sanctions produced the intended consequences, in modern history at least. I can think of the case of South Africa, but there was a different kind of sanctions regime. It was more like tertiary sanctions, imposed indeed by consumers of wealthy nations against companies investing in South Africa. And that situation may have contributed to the outcome, but apart from that, I cannot think of one case where one can in fact argue that sanctions are effective. I'm making this case generally, and you know for certain I cannot be this agnostic when the people we're talking about are our own people. But there's another reason why analytically one can demonstrate that sanctions in the case of Gaza cannot work, ex ante cannot work. Reason for that is the existence of tunnels that are used to smuggle things in and out in the southern portion of Gaza. Tunnels, everybody knows, work to the benefit of Hamas, almost to the exclusive benefit of Hamas. If the target of the sanctions regime is to weaken Hamas while safeguarding the interests of the people to the extent possible, clearly this was not working. If anything, tunnel trade flourished under the sanctions regime because sanctions did nothing to affect the tunnels. In fact, things that used to come through other crossings started to come through the tunnels with a levy imposed by Hamas on tunnel trade. Clearly this situation was not working. People were put at harm and life became completely intolerable. We argued for some time that the situation is not sustainable and that the passages should reopen. There's been interest in this proposal. I can tell you, going back to December 17th last month, 2 good things happened on December 17th of last year. One was the pledging conference in Paris, which was hugely successful. Another was the meeting of the International Quartet, at which our proposal to assume responsibility for managing the crossing was adopted by the Quartet. Since then, we got that approved also by the Arab League, and more recently by the Islamic Conference. So it has gathered momentum, and we are now beginning to see some movement toward the implementation of that proposal. I think it would make sense. I think that would be a way in which the psychology could begin to change to the better. You need to give people something to lose. Now, insofar as violence out of Gaza, I think the least we could do, and we have, and we continue to do, is to call this what it is. This is something that is utterly unacceptable. We reject it flatly and completely. We say this not only in English, we say it in Arabic, we say it whenever there is a chance to say it. It's very important for leaders and leadership to express itself very clearly and categorically on this issue. These have brought us nothing but absolute disaster over the years. That's the experience. It has brought with it, as I mentioned in my statement before you, ladies and gentlemen, this evening, a disproportionate Israeli military response, oftentimes, that led to loss of innocent life, a lot. This cycle of violence has to be broken. I think we all need to speak to that. We need to be aggressive addressing it in the hope that people will begin to change their mind about this. Not to mention that those who are involved in this activity are not the 1.5 million Palestinians who are residing in Gaza. This, plus trying to alter the adverse reality on the ground by virtue of allowing some movement, some life back into the economy, I'm hopeful that the combination of these things, together with the tough message of non-tolerance of militias, that's very important. I mean, either we are on a path of building toward Palestinian statehood, or we are going to continue to tolerate existence of militias. These are mutually exclusive and parallel paths. They will never meet. They have not met in the history of any other nation. And it's about time that we learn from our experience. These are very important passages. By themselves, I'm afraid, saying all of this by itself is not going to do the job. However, a combination of that, speaking forcefully, with conviction about these issues, continuously, but at the same time providing for the welfare of our people to the extent that can be done, with however little resources we have, I think there we might be able to put ourselves on a better path. That's my thinking on this.
Thanks. I'd love to get your assessment of where you see us now in the post-Annapolis environment. In particular, say a word about what the dialogue is like between you and the Israelis now, and the channels that were set up at Annapolis, and what you are looking for both from Israel and from the United States to keep that process moving forward in the coming months.
Well, we're talking, which is better than talking to begin with. That's what Annapolis did. Annapolis came in after a period of 7 or 8 years of very little by way of talks. And so far as we are concerned, Palestinians, virtually complete isolation, marginalization. Annapolis was good for us and for the process. It represented a point in time when, stationed along this long and arduous path to peace, where interest was recreated in the political process. The period and the run-up to Annapolis witnessed intensive diplomatic and political activity, which was itself good, set the stage for Annapolis. It was not easy, with many speculating that what then became Annapolis Conference may actually not happen, given the difficulties encountered. But to the credit of the President of the United States and Secretary of State, Annapolis happened. I mean, they pushed and persevered when the doubters became many, as a matter of fact. Annapolis defined the road ahead in an important sense to mean the following. Political negotiations have to proceed, but at the same time, things had to begin to happen in a way that provided support to the political process, in ways that could make it work to produce the outcome that everybody wants, which is to end the occupation and to have an independent state of Palestine emerge on the occupied territories. That's basically what it is. It was the first time, I think, that the world together has come to the point of seeing similarly the way this issue has to be dealt with. In the past, it was either complete or excessive focus on the issues of here and now, movement, economy, etc., or the other extreme of being preoccupied completely with the political issues, the political process, the negotiations, while ignoring the issues of here and now, security, governance, needs of Palestinians and Israelis and all. I think Annapolis was good in the sense of it having put together these two things together. It represented a point at which there was an adoption of what I myself call bifocal strategy. I mean, we need to be able to do this and this at the same time in order for us to be able to solve this issue. You know, I talked about the chicken and egg argument, the circularity of this security, livelihood thing. And, you know, we could talk about this. And I have, and we all have, endlessly, but fruitlessly. You know, being totally preoccupied with the issues of here and now is understandable. But without what Secretary Rice subsequently started to call political horizon, you know, that process cannot have life of its own. Conversely, if you were to completely preoccupy yourself with political issues and ignore the issues of here and now, including security, then political process cannot be sustained. We know that. You know, just as I told you, we have experience with chaos of weapons and arms and militias. We also have experience with the political process, a political process that does not pay sufficient attention to the needs of Israelis and Palestinians now, that do not begin to address Israel's security concern, our security concerns and needs, our needs to live with dignity. If these elements are not there simultaneously, political process cannot be sustained. And certainly it is not likely to produce the outcome that we all desire it would produce. For these reasons, Annapolis was good. It brought into sharp focus the need for the parties to implement, to carry out obligations that they entered into in the spring of 2003. In a modest way, I contributed personally to that thinking. You know, when there was this talk about the political horizon, I said for the process to have credibility after 7 years of marginalization, it was very important for people to begin to see things begin to happen on the ground, for the context to change to the better. It was important for both peoples, for both sides to begin to see new reality. And, you know, look no further than the obligations entered into under the roadmap to peace. Spring 2003. It has obligations, has outlined obligations on the part of Palestinians, obligations on the part of Israelis, obligations that, in my view, the drafting which makes a great deal of sense. Since this enterprise is about ending the occupation that began in 1967 and is about establishing an independent state of Palestine, it stands to reason that requirements on the Palestinian side be focused on institution building, capacity strengthening in all spheres of governance, including security. I mean, that's what our obligations under the roadmap are. They relate with our capacity to govern ourselves. They make sense. It makes sense for a roadmap to peace if it were to include commitments on the Palestinian side, to include those. On the Israeli side, it includes the commitments focused on issues that also were seen as instrumental to the possibility of emergence of a Palestinian state. They include, importantly, a commitment on the part of Israel to free settlement activity. Now, that's important. Again, you know, if this exercise is about ending the occupation and about the emergence of a viable, contiguous Palestinian state on the territories occupied in 1967, it stands to reason that settlement activity stop. You know, all we're saying here on the Israeli side, insofar as settlement activity is concerned, is that, you know, something that works to the detriment of the viability of Palestinian statehood should stop. That's all. Before we could begin to work together on reversing whatever things that needed to be reversed, working together. So, to me, that made a great deal of sense. It was important to really bring it into sharp focus. And as I say, I mean, in modest ways, I contributed to that thinking. I felt it necessary. And then, you know, everybody agreed that the context has to be improved. People had to really feel better about the prospects of the process. both Palestinians and Israelis needed to buy into this process. The process had to have credibility after the many, many failures and disappointments since Oslo. That's where we are today. We are in the beginning. The difficulties we encountered in the run-up to Annapolis and the difficulties we're still having today in terms of securing those commitments in a sufficiently firm and convincing way, I find troubling, to be honest with you. That's why, to close on this, I say resolving this conflict and a peace treaty is possible in the course of 2008. It's possible because, peace treaty is about agreement on so-called permanent status issues, which have been extensively discussed, if not indeed deeply negotiated on previous occasions. So I think it's possible. Is it likely? I like to believe yes. But, based on the record so far, I have to say that a lot more work has to be done, and soon, in order for me to be able to answer that question in the affirmative. Nevertheless, I don't want you to leave you on a down note on this one. We should persevere. We should pursue this political process. We should not give up on it. And just as strongly as I say that, I do believe that we should also stay the course and mind the business of the here and now, because failure to do so is also problematic. So if, for whatever reason, if we do not finish the job, at least we'll have made progress. And that's what would make this period different from previous periods. I can tell you more about this. Looking at the situation from my previous capacity, working with the International Monetary Fund for many years, there, I was disturbed for a long time that, the issues that I talked about in terms of them being commitments on the Palestinian side or obligations related to governance, strength and capacity and all of these things, those issues, a lot of you, and I see a lot of students in the audience, actually I'm happy about that especially, you may be surprised about this, but those issues were not subject matter of great deal of attention on the part of the international community. And that's regrettable. That's regrettable. In the 90s, speaking, candidly, maybe I would want to speak not too diplomatically about this. Expediency was the name of the game. Not enough attention was paid to governance. This is about, building towards statehood. It's supposed to be that. So issues of governance should have been really paid much greater attention to during those formative years of the peace process. For some reason, they were not, to our detriment and to the detriment of this process, quite frankly. I say now we are on a better track. We lost some ground since then, but it is well within what we can do with the help and encouragement of the United States and the rest of the international community to begin to at least arrest the damage and hopefully in the not too distant future begin to reverse it. So if we fail to achieve peace in 2008, we'll have gained something. We'll have gained something. At least we now know and the world knows. And the more that is said about it, the more we all will be accountable. And that's very important. Not only Palestinians and Israelis, but the United States, leading the international community, will also be more accountable in this trilateral or tripartite framework of accountability to a process that has a beginning and an end and requirements for success.
Thank you. I have to say that as somebody who was involved in this in the 90s, I both agree with your diagnosis that attention was not given to the governance issues. I could probably give you an explanation, but not an excuse as to why that was. But I do agree with you it was an opportunity lost. Let me ask one more, and then we'll turn to the audience. The Palestinians have had a complex relationship with the other key Arab countries over the years, and I'd be particularly interested in sort of what you see as the role going forward of Egypt and Saudi Arabia, how helpful they're being now, how useful is it for them to play a role in trying to deal with the internal Palestinian disputes, the efforts of the Saudis to develop national government of unity, the Egyptian efforts, and where they fit in your mind to this process?
A multiplicity of things and roles and elements of a role that has to be played and is being played. First of all, let me start from the outside in, in terms of the overall context. Not only Saudi Arabia and Egypt, but I think the entire Arab world is to be credited for having adopted the Arab Peace Initiative back in 2002. Not much was made of it, and maybe we Arabs are to blame, at least in part, for that, because we did not do enough to promote that initiative. That initiative, which incidentally was subsequently adopted by the Islamic Conference, which means all members to that august body, involves the promise of normalization, firm promise of normalization of relations between the Arab world and Islamic world by extension, and the State of Israel, pending end of this conflict, culminating in withdrawal from occupied territories and concluding the kind of agreement that we're talking about here. It's an important thing. It was a missed opportunity for a good number of years, in the sense that it was not talked about enough, but I think it's important in the sense of giving also, what I could call or term political horizon to Israel. What does this mean, to the State of Israel? It's important. And it was an important threshold, and it's I cannot describe to you the importance with which I viewed the moment in time when it happened, because it represented consensus. What is important for you to know, particularly students, is that these decisions can only be taken if everybody agrees to them. You cannot, just like the EU, Arab League does not work but on a consensus basis. In other words, if one member votes no, a resolution doesn't pass. That was important. That was important. It was sense. Second, Arab countries, particularly those with resources, have been helping the cause through financial aid, economic assistance, which is important. Third part relates to what you have mentioned about role in helping us deal with the current state of fragmentation. Let me tell you before I get into this that I feel very emotional when it comes to this state of what I call fragmentation. It's the worst thing that happened to us Palestinians since the occupation of 6/7. And to this day, I am not sure that the right lessons have been learned from this horrible thing. Trouble with this is, for a long time, I myself, long time meaning year two, I saw it coming. In the course of the dialogue or rounds of dialogue that took place after the January 2000 elections, to try to bring better alignment between who we are politically and international requirements and obligations on the other hand, there were several rounds of dialogue. And throughout those rounds of dialogue, the important security of chaos of arms and weapons was ignored. I remember, sadly, that on one occasion, that's May 2006, only a few months after January elections and a couple of months after the Hamas government was formed. In a forum like this, video link, Gaza, Ramallah, etc., with speaker after speaker, talking about sanctity of Palestinian blood, meaning that, Palestinians are not going to fight amongst each other to the point of spilling Palestinian blood. I was not really persuaded by this. As a matter of record, I stood up and I said, Palestinian blood regrettably is going to be spilled. Why? Because this dialogue is ignoring the most fundamental of issues, and that is security doctrine. What sort of security doctrine should guide us Palestinians, on the basis of which we should learn to operate and live? A situation in which there was this chaos of weapons and armed militias running around was not conducive to us being able to live together in peace and domestic harmony in ways that could enable us to move toward statehood and independence, in ways that could give confidence to the international community, including especially Israel, of where we're headed with this. Very detrimental. And look at what happened. Total lawlessness. I said in my statement to you, security is at least as much a Palestinian need as it is an Israeli need. Israel to the world looks like a small country. To us, it's a huge power. Per capita income in Palestine is merely 5% of what it is in Israel. So, yes, Israel has legitimate security concerns, but we do have security concerns of our own. Look at what lack of security did to us. Look at what lawlessness did to us. I argue that was precisely through this channel of chaos of arms that the political differences amongst us Palestinians led to us being where we are today. So, as we are helped to try to put the pieces together, this key principle has to be observed as a principle, not as a condition. I know, like all other conflicts, the domestic Palestinian conflict will have to end politically one day. If it is not ended politically, it means it's not ending. There's no conflict in the world that has not ended but politically. And to end politically, we need to have a basis, to have principles to guide that process. I think learning and building on our own experience, and that's all I say. These are not conditions. Look at our experience, look at the record, and answer honestly, with a bit of moral courage, have we been on the right path? Has this chaos been anything but completely catastrophic to us? And if so, why is it that we cannot agree on a security doctrine that says weapons and arms are the sole purview of the state, period? Period. Because unless we do that, we're not going to be able to move forward. This has to be understood by us, and it has to be understood by anyone who may want to help us, try to get to this point. As I say, all conflicts cannot end but politically. And this is no exception. One day it will. I hope what we're doing in terms of trying to do the very best we can for our own people, trying to reach out and explain ourselves, trying to do everything we possibly can by speaking to the issues with clarity and conviction, that we're going to be able to make a difference. But ultimately, settling things politically means, in this day and age, going back to people and asking them how they feel about things, meaning elections. Sooner or later we're going to have those, and we'll see. In the meantime, we need to work in order to create the context in which this can happen, because elections cannot but happen by consensus. We cannot. In the meantime, we should advance the discussion. But we should, talk about issues with clarity. We cannot, go back to just a political discussion of whether this political program is acceptable or that political program is acceptable. There can be political pluralism. In fact, it's welcome. I mean, it's all right, and people can have different political views. But, we could find ways in which we could coexist politically, even in the rather odd situation which we are in. One way, for example, is for the factions to agree that a way forward, also one possibility, of course, for Hamas to basically adapt and change its platform. How likely is this? I do not know, when it will happen. So this leads to the discussion where people sit down and begin to engage in phraseology. Phraseology is all right once concepts are clear. If concepts are not clear and agreed, it's just an exercise in phraseology, and that's not a very good thing to do. So I think we need to be practical. If parties do not wish to alter their platforms, then the very least they could do is to agree on the creation of a government in Palestine, which at all times will be in complete conformity with the political program of the PLO, meaning in full compliance and fully accepting of all of the agreements, commitments that had been entered into on behalf of the entire Palestinian people around the world by the PLO. That is something that I think is workable. What is more problematic from my point of view is the first element that I mentioned, security. And it worries me because so far it has not been considered by parties talking about dialogue and discussion. When they begin to do so, I'll begin to have a little bit of sense of possibility and maybe at least encouragement. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay, we have a microphone in the center here. What I'd like you to do is come up to the microphones. I'd ask that if you'd identify yourself, and since I think there's a lot of interest in where we're all coming from across campus, what part of campus you come from. Please.
I'm Dave Eaton. Well, let's see. Is this working?
I think it's on.
Okay. I'm Dave Eaton. I'm a faculty member at the LBJ School. I've been working since 1991 with Palestinians, Jordanians, and Israelis about water and shared water. And I liked your vision of the bifocal approach, because water, there are both short-term needs and there's some long-term needs. And what struck me over the years is there is remarkable consensus among Palestinian professionals and Israeli professionals on the way forward, both short-term and long-term. And you have to start with some steps. And it seems to me that water is an easier step than almost any other in terms of that shared consensus of what's feasible. And so I guess the question is, how can one move forward? Is it possible in principle to move forward on something where there may be consensus, or does one have to, how important is it to solve everything at once versus trying to move forward on something where you could?
Water, I think that there are two issues here. First, in terms of it being an issue for discussion or resolution, as an issue or one of the issues that have to be agreed as part of treaty. But there are again, I have to borrow your words, which you borrowed from me, the duality of vision here. We have to really consider what it is we can do together to deal with the problems of here and now. I think as an issue of rights, water should not be too difficult to deal with in the context of a negotiated settlement, because there is agreement amongst the parties, between the parties, on this being subject to the operation of international law that governs water rights. And that law says few specific things. Some specific things which, if acceptable as a matter of rights, I am not really pessimistic that this is an issue that can be dealt with fairly easily. But I do not believe that has been an obstacle or a constraint on the capacity to deal with the issues of here and now. In fact, I believe a lot more can be done. Some important work has been done. A lot more work can be done, regardless of how this issue, in terms of the rights, content of it, regardless of how it is going to be addressed later. There is some more interest in water issues these days. Since you teach this and you deal with Israelis, Jordanians, and Palestinians, I do know, I'm certain you know that there is renewed interest now in some major strategic projects. If only we can really see that famous feasibility study on the Red Dead ever done or concluded. I do not know why is it that something that I do not want to offend the sensibilities of scientists in this room. I do not know how many of them there are. Hard scientists, not like us, social scientists or stuff. But you have an elevation differential of some 400 meters between the Red Sea and the Dead Sea. So to me, it's quite logical to expect that if one has built a ditch, that water would flow from one to another. I do not know why is it that this has to be studied for I don't know how many years, and at a cost of $30 million. At that. Somebody's getting rich and happy somewhere, but these are the kinds of things that should be done. You look, for example, at the Dead Sea and what happened to it. It's really very bad. And there's also some serious consideration being given now to desalination that could benefit everybody. I'm sure you know about that. We, as I mentioned in my statement before you this evening, we are holding this business conference. I hope some of you, I've met some of you back there, and I hope that some of you at least can come. The dates for that, it's free of charge, 8th and 7th of May. And we're beginning to work very hard. Some of these projects are going to be taken up in the context of that conference, and the private sector is going to be involved in this. Now that gives me hope that we may be able to do something. I'm serious about the invitation to come. We'll take care of transportation, domestic transportation, not Pakistan.
Please, questions? Just come on up to the mic and.
Hi. I'm Yosef Bonaparte from State of Israel. I'm from Nazareth 48. I'm from the economics department, and I guess you graduated from our department.
Yes.
So we have two professors here, and the graduate coordinator, Vivian. So I don't know if you recognize them.
Excellent.
Hey, Vivian, how are you?
Okay.
Thank you, Yusuf, for telling me. Thank you. How have you been? You should have told me you're here. And is that Vince Gerasi sitting next to you? No? Who's sitting next to you? That's what I thought. Yeah, how are you doing? Dr. Desi, how are you, sir? Very good to see you on. You should have told me you're here from the beginning. I should have looked your way. But thanks for drawing my attention.
Sure. The first day I came to UT Austin Economics Department, they asked me about you, if I know you. I said, oh yeah, I know him. Palestine is one person, I know him. So, yeah, I hate politics. I like to talk about politics, but American politics. I like Obama, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to ask you about economics question. You talked about one of the objectives.
I graduated 22 years ago. I forgot most of my economics.
That's cool. That's awesome.
I don't know if Professor Desi would be happy with that. So ask me something else.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So you said one of the objectives of your government is to create jobs because you have high unemployment. And you said you're going to engage the private sector in creating the jobs, which is great. When I was 2 years ago, I was working in an economic problem, which is in the welfare of Palestinians have their own currency. To the people here, Palestinians use 3 currencies: Israeli shekel, Jordanian dinars, and perhaps in Gaza they use the Egyptian currency.
No.
They don't use it.
Same thing.
Yeah. So each Palestinian household is a banker, actually. He has multiple currencies in the same house. So my question was, if there is a welfare gain from Palestinians to have their independent currency. So my question to you is whether your government is thinking, I was working on this project and then I stopped because the rising of Hamas, so I thought it's over. But I'm wondering if your government, one of the objectives if your government has to study their own independent currency, and if you can tell me more in depth if you have.
Yeah, I understand the question, and thank you. Well, with all the problems we have, I'm not sure we would want to add to our trouble or to our problems another problem to manage. The problem of not only introducing currency but managing it. See, the issue is not to produce it. System as it is now, offers important advantages. I understand, of course, the attraction of having one's own currency, particularly given the political context of all of this. Currency for a long time was seen as a sign of sovereignty. You're a country, so you have currency, and you are under mandate or something, you have their currency. And for people, Palestinian people who longed for independence and statehood and freedom for decades, you can understand the desire to have currency yesterday. But it's a temptation that I have worked hard on resisting and educating against for a long time, at least so far. And, out of sense of responsibility, not because I have a diluted sense of patriotism about anything. The concepts are a little bit mixed up, just like everything else. When you get political considerations sort of factored into this, it's difficult to see through it. First of all, currency is no longer the sign of sovereignty it once was. Consider what happened in Europe with the introduction of euro, for example, where sovereign country after sovereign country and proud European country after more prouder European country give up their currency in favor of one single currency, that's euro. I say this all the time, trying to keep the expectations down as to when we should do this. Currency introduction has some basic requirements. First, on the government side, and secondly, on the financial system generally. Currency is a liability of the issuing. I'm now being technical. Bear with me. You're an economics student. You ask the question, so you have to take the answer. Currency is a liability of the issuing agency. So if you issue a currency, you have issued the form of a liability on you. Now, if you are an ordinary citizen, you make little distinction between a liability issued by the government and a liability issued by a central bank. A government bond and a currency are both forms of liability on the issuing agency in the mind of a lay person. they're one and the same. Now, if you are a government that happens to have piled up overdue financial obligations toward your civil servants, you have not paid them for a while. If you are a government that has piled up overdue financial obligations to private sector vendors, you have not paid them for a while. If you have been erratic meeting financial obligations generally, it means necessarily, I'm sure you're told this and you agree with me, that a liability that you would want to introduce will have to be priced with a premium in order for people to be willing to hold it. You see what I'm saying? So if you issue a form of debt, you have to offer it at a fairly high rate of return in order for someone to be willing to hold it. The same is true of currency. Given that in the mind of the public, these are all liabilities, government or public liabilities, if you are in an environment like this, chances are there's going to be kind of contagion running from central government to central bank, where you begin to issue currency to do it, to introduce it successfully, to induce people to hold it voluntarily and freely. I mean, remember, see, we're not, operating in a closed environment. We are an open economy. Actually, we believe firmly in openness. We do not have any, by the way, we do not have any capital controls in Palestine. None whatsoever. You can bring in whatever you want. You can take out whatever you want. No capital controls whatsoever. If you are in an environment like this, you cannot force people to hold your currency, something which a lot of countries tried over decades and failed miserably. Then you have to induce them to hold it voluntarily. You have to price it high, right? What does it mean? It means high interest rates in the economy. I go back to your first point. You'll make a great politician. I encourage you. Look, you said something that's profoundly right. You said objective of economic policy. You have to begin with jobs, job creation. I mean, look at it from right, left, whichever way you look at it. If you are talking about putting together any coherent, sensible economic policy, that has to be the starting point of analysis. What sort of configuration is necessary to adopt in order for you to be able to create jobs and to grow the economy, quote unquote? That's Clinton's phrase he introduced some time ago. I mean, Bill Clinton. Anyway, you remember when he said it first, to grow the economy, it's kind of strange expression, but to grow the economy, to create jobs, essentially. Anyway, if that's your preoccupation, and if, as you said, we have high unemployment, and we have a challenge of having to deal with absorbing 50,000 new entrants to the labor force every year, is it not costly from that technical point of view to introduce currency? The answer is yes, for sure. And remember, since this is an open economy, no capital controls, people are free to choose. They can choose to hold dollars, they can choose to hold shekels, they can choose to hold dinars, euros, whatever. It's an open economy. So conditions have to be more right on the government side before you do this. There are other conditions related to the strength of financial system, banking system, whether or not you have adequate banking supervision. On that, I can tell you, as part of what we have been able to do in Palestine, we have a fairly well functioning banking supervision function. It's good. I would say, let's wait on this a bit longer. It's not a priority. It's good to do. At some point we'll do it. What we're losing on this is seigniorage. I mean, the income that comes with issuing your currency and convincing people to hold it. Somebody is collecting it, issuing, the Fed is getting it, Bank of Israel is getting it, Central Bank of Jordan is getting it. We are not. But it's a small price, it's a small something to forego in the interest of steady building institutionally and capacity-wise. That's my answer.
Thanks. Professor.
Well, I have to struggle with this.
Excellent.
I mean,
Excellent.
It's not obvious.
We'll see how you're graded by your former colleagues. Please, go ahead.
Yes. My name is Faris Shanak. I'm a finance student at UT. I like politics, so I'll ask a political question. Given that Lieberman left the coalition because they're negotiating with the Israeli coalition because they're negotiating with the Palestinians, and that the other political parties will leave if they negotiate anything about Jerusalem, which will bring down Olmert's coalition. Do you really have a partner for peace in Israel?
Well, I said a while ago, we need to partner with each other in order for us to be able to get to a resolution. And for a while, we were called a non-partner or a non-existent partner on the Palestinian side. I don't think it's particularly productive to re-engage in this business of is there a partner, is no partner. I'm someone who deeply knows the trouble of the past. I mean, I understand the history very well, and I can tell you, that this whole acrimony, he said, she said, he said, we say, they say, it's not going to take us anywhere, quite frankly. And this is, a call both on us and the Israelis to stop this business of, finger pointing and who showed up and who didn't show up. The end result of all of these charges and counter charges is a process that has failed and failed miserably and produced a lot of disappointment. And many lives were lost in the process, needlessly. I would say governing the state of Israel is Israel's business. I mean, we have our hands full as it is. I mean, something was mentioned about Gaza. It's hard for me to think about us and Israel when it comes to governance, to be honest with you. It's hard enough to manage our own side of the border. The nature of things, Israel has a coalition government, and the nature of the political system there is maybe not likely to produce a single party government for years to come. So this is a reality that has to be dealt with. But this is a test of leadership. And we Palestinians, for a long time, we have been on the receiving end of lectures on leadership. Only if you showed some leadership here and some leadership there, and etc. It's high time that message be understood by everyone. I mean, when peace agreement is, if a peace agreement is to be reached, strong leadership is required. Definitely, there's no question about that. And leadership requires that you manage. You are the Prime Minister of Israel. You are in charge. And I do not believe that we, the international community, Israeli public for that matter, should continue to be drawn into a discussion of what if type of situation insofar as coalition government in Israel, because Israel is likely to continue to have coalition government for some time to come. And if it's not going to be for this reason, it's going to be for another reason. I think this issue has to be given priority. I think, to be honest with you, this is what people want. It looks like, based on the opinion polls, at least the ones I read, they all suggest that there is a significant majority in favor of a peaceful resolution of this conflict on both sides of this divide. I think that sense has to be nurtured and it has to be developed in order to put the pressure necessary in order to produce the will to do this. For its part, I think the international community, should refrain from continuing to think too much about these considerations, whether our own political considerations or Israel's political considerations. Peace is an interest first and foremost for the peoples of the region. We and the Israelis are immediately affected by this conflict. But so is the broader region, and so is the world community as a whole. I think the world should be less and less accommodating to us when it comes to this business of political considerations. And there are challenges on the Israeli side, there are challenges on our side. I think we have to learn to manage those, and it's a test of leadership that we are able or unable to do so.
Got time for one more question if we've got somebody from the audience. Go right ahead, please.
You talked about ending conflicts between Palestinian groups, particularly Hamas. I was curious, and you also talked about Hamas potentially changing their platform and that sort of thing. I was curious how you think Hamas might be persuaded to change their platform and what concessions you think would be expected or required.
That has not happened so far. And the rounds of dialogue that took place before did not produce that kind of change. they produced formulations that were not regarded as adequate by the international community. As you may recall, as a consequence or a product of the last round of dialogue, the Mecca Accord produced a national unity government on which I personally served as finance minister for three months. It lasted only 3 months. That formulation was not regarded as adequate. It was not seen as having represented the change necessary in the political platform of Hamas. Now, there are ways in which this can be handled. But those ways, regardless of which way one comes to this issue from, have to take into consideration the nature of our political system and who we are, and what sort of elections are we having, and under what context and conditions we are operating. We are a product of a peace process called Oslo process that produced the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian Authority is not a state. Otherwise we'd be having a different kind of discussion this evening. It's a transition to statehood. It's transition to statehood. So we were created in the context of an agreement that was reached on the basis of commitments entered into voluntarily by the parties, the sides here, Israel and the PLO, acting on behalf of all Palestinian people. Most importantly, the so-called Declaration of Mutual Recognition, going back to 1993. Some of you are too young to remember that, but in any event, it's very refreshing to be with young people. But anyway, that's an important agreement. I mean, we were created as a Palestinian Authority as a consequence of that agreement. Now, to operate politically in the context of that agreement and to say that you do not accept it, I mean, there's a bit of a problem with that. I mean, I understand differences of views. I mean, I can, respect where people are coming from, intellectually speaking. But this is not an intellectual exercise. I mean, we could, debate this in a setting like this for a long period of time. And I'm respectful of the views of others, and I'm all for, political pluralism and freedom of speech and expression and all. But, this is real life. This is about ending occupation. This is about freedom for our people. This is about peace and security for everyone, including Israelis, Palestinians, rest of the neighborhood, etc. So people want to have a different point of view. That's fine, except that it's difficult to govern. It's difficult to govern, as the experience demonstrated. Again, all I'm really talking about here is if we are having this discussion, a couple of years ago, I could say, all right, people are free to discuss whatever it is, but, we have experience. We have, Hamas tried to govern, after elections, and a Hamas-only government. That didn't quite work out, for obvious reasons. I mean, there is this contradiction. Let me explain this a little bit more. You please bear with me, because this is not sufficiently well understood. I think, the whole world, focused more on the international dimension of this, incongruence, if you will, where you had a government elected duly through a democratic process, which I described as fair and open, and it was. I ran for office during those elections, and I cannot but tell you that the process was extremely fair. And you had this outcome, and the problem that was seen with it immediately was international in nature. I mean, here is an elections outcome that was certain to bring in government a faction whose political platform was at odds with the international community, international obligations, etc., etc. What was not sufficiently taken into account internationally was that this actually produced a problem domestically, and not only internationally. The government which Hamas was to head as a consequence of the 2000 elections, if it were to have a Hamas-only platform based on the party platform, that government was going to govern the country on the basis of a platform that was profoundly and fundamentally different from the platform on which the president of the PA ran and won office a year earlier. Now that president happens to be not only president of Palestinian Authority, and that's really the key, that's the point that I wanted to explain. He happens to be not only president of Palestinian Authority, he happens to be the head of the PLO, which is the sole legitimate representative of Palestinian people under the declaration of mutual recognition, the party that was recognized and fully empowered to represent us Palestinians, whether in Palestine or in diaspora. So here you had a situation where you have a government that's supposed to govern on the basis of a party platform that was completely inconsistent, or at least in important fundamental ways, with the provisions of the platform of the PLO. So you had a problem there domestically even, not to mention, of course, internationally, which everybody knows about. I mean, that's the oddity of the situation. Anywhere else in the world, this would have been a no-brainer. A party wins majority, a party governs, and that's the end of that. But in a situation like this, complicated by all of these considerations, that just simply was untenable. That just simply was untenable. It was only a matter of time. I know a lot is being said, who caused what to whom and who did what to whom and all of that. People may find it profitable to talk about this. I don't. I don't. The truth lies somewhere, and the truth is the truth anyway. I know it did not work. I mean, the end result did not work. And I can tell you it cannot work for the reasons I mentioned. Not only internationally, but domestically. The sooner we recognize this, the better. Now, one way of dealing with this is to say any party wishing to run for office here should, as a prerequisite, comply with the provisions of the PLO program. I mean, that makes eminent sense. I'm approaching this scientifically now. I mean, appealing to belong at least for 2 minutes to the membership of scientists here this afternoon. So that's one way of doing it. Say you want to run, you want to govern, all right. This is the context which created you. You had better, accept it before you run. So this way nobody is embarrassed or causing a problem. Well, where we are. That did not happen. That requirement was not there, and the outcome is the outcome. One way is, for people to look at the situation and say, well, we know we tried this, didn't work, so we have to change. Whether that will happen sometime soon or not, I do not know. I do not believe it's likely. It doesn't look like, that's about to happen. Instead of engaging in endless debate as to whose program should prevail, and I have my own views on that, I think what would be more profitable for everybody is for there to be agreement that regardless of elections outcomes in Palestine, until we get to statehood, regardless, that it should be accepted that a government that will govern the country, which is an important element of the executive branch of government, has to at all times conform to the requirements that created the PA. So it is conceivable that you could have a situation where parties have their own programs that are at odds with the program of PLO, but the government that is in charge of governing the country, dealing with the international community at all levels, is one whose political program is in full conformity, no if, but, or wherefore, with the program PLO and with all the commitments and obligations they're under. I tell you, this is important for us. This is our link to international legitimacy. This is not, as oftentimes our people see it, on television screen, debating, shouting at each other, a sign of weakness. It's not. We are as interested as ending the occupation and getting our people to live as free people, like any other people around the world, as anyone else. But we believe we have signed important agreements in 1993. Those mean something. We're committed to them. Those link us to international legitimacy that guarantees, if adhered to, ending that very occupation and giving us the possibility of living as free people in a state of our own. Yes, living side by side in peace, harmony, dignity with our neighbors, including the State of Israel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fayyad.
I gotta say hello to my friends.
Please. I just want to say on behalf of everybody here that we hear a lot of talk about straight talk here in the United States in our campaigns, but that was a wonderful example of a true straight talk, and thank you for coming here.
Thank you very much.